In this last part of Chapter 11, we are going to begin to talk about pain and the transmission of pain and the amplification or reduction of pain by the nervous system. So we talked about pain in pathophysiology, we talked about it in modalities class, and now we're going to talk about it more on the neurological level. So sort of just another layer of detail to get you working on this. So a lot of the information about pain is all theoretical at this point. We don't really know for sure how pain works. And one person's experience of pain is going to be very different from another person's experience of pain. So what we're going to talk about in this course is we're going to talk about sort of the current theories and what is known about pain. And in Chapter 12, we're going to talk a little bit about chronic pain syndromes and what sort of treatments are done for chronic pain syndromes. So for this part of Chapter 11, I want you to be able to define referred pain and primary hyperalgesia. We'll talk about each of those. What is the pain matrix and what does it do? I want you to be able to describe the characteristics of acute pain versus chronic pain. And we've talked about this before as well. So hopefully this will be a nice review for you. I want you to be able to compare nociceptive chronic pain, which we'll talk about in this chapter, and neuropathic chronic pain, which we'll talk about in Chapter 12. And I want you to be able to describe the 5-level model of antinociception. So as we have already figured out in modalities class, there are different ways we can address pain. There are ascending methods of pain management, there are descending methods of pain management, and in this chapter we call pain management antinociception. I'm going to present you this 5-level model, and I want you to be able to describe that. So pain is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience that is frequently associated with tissue damage or potential tissue damage. So pain can be experienced independently of tissue damage. So if there's a potential, our nervous system is sending us the signal like, hey, something might happen, you better do something to prevent it from happening. So nociceptors can signal injury, but we can also have pain in the absence of injury. Persistent pain can affect emotional, autonomic, and social functions of life. So the current pain theories sort of present what we call a biopsychosocial theory of pain, meaning it's not just biological, it's not just psychological, it's not just sociological, it involves all areas of life. So pretty interesting stuff. So both A delta and C fibers transmit pain signals from muscles and joints. And signals can be interpreted as both fast and slow pain, what we talked about in the last section of the chapter, the spinothalamic pain versus the spinolimbic or spinal emotional pain. And both of those can occur with musculoskeletal injuries. When tissue is injured or ischemic, so deprived of oxygen, biochemicals that awaken or sensitize nociceptors are released, and that makes the nociceptors excessively reactive to stimuli. And this is called peripheral sensitization. So when the nociceptors are sensitized, they can fire in response to things that would normally be innocuous, things that would normally not bother you in any way, such as slight movement, or the neurons might just fire spontaneously because they're ticked off. So the analogy that I use for this is the alarm on your car. You want the alarm on your car to go off when somebody's trying to break into the car. You don't want it to go off when a leaf blows by. When a leaf blows by, that's where it's excessively sensitized, and an innocuous event, like a leaf blowing by, can set off the alarm. So we want to save the alarm for when something is really happening. But unlike superficial pain, deep pain usually occurs after tissue's been damaged. So the function of deep pain may be to encourage rest of the damaged tissue. So the example given in the book is that after a lower extremity injury, pain with weight bearing often produces a modified gait. The modified gait is characterized by a shortened stance phase on the effective side, and we refer to this as an antalgic gait. So algia is the root word meaning pain, ant is no, and so an antalgic gait is a pain avoiding gait, basically. And the layman's term for that is limping. So there's a little 45-second video of an antalgic gait in the module. But I think probably all of us right now could demonstrate an antalgic gait if we want to. And that's something that we will often note in our SOAP note. In the objective section, we're going to observe that the patient had an antalgic gait. So referred pain is pain that is perceived as coming from a site distinct from the actual site of origin. So usually referred pain is from visceral tissues being referred to a skin sensory dermatome. So the explanation for referred pain comes from the convergence and facilitation of nociceptive information from different sources. In other words, nerve fibers from organs and nerve fibers from skin converge into collateral branches in the spinal cord or thalamus. So the dorsal root neuron innervates skin and viscera, and the signal is misinterpreted as coming from a different location. So in the book, there's a little diagram of common referral patterns from different organs. And it's pretty interesting that it's that consistent because it's where the location of the individual neurons are. There's also a little less than 2-minute video about referred pain. So the pain matrix is what the term that we use to refer to a group of brain structures that process and regulate pain information. So those pain matrix structures are capable of creating pain or the perception of pain in the absence of nociceptive input. So it's easy to make the mistake of thinking of pain is like, oh, you poke one end of a nociceptor and it sends pain up to the brain. But really, it sends pain to the brain and then the brain gets to decide what to do with it. So a lot of times you'll see the phrase, pain is in the brain, and some people think of that as saying, oh, well, it's all psychological or it's all in your head. And that's not what we mean by that. What we really mean by that is that the brain gets to decide. All of these structures in the brain, the pain matrix, they include the brainstem, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and areas of the cerebral cortex. They all get to decide whether or not we're going to perceive pain. Whether there's nociceptive input or not. So there might be reasons why the pain matrix wants to give us a signal of pain. So the experience of pain is largely linked to emotional, behavioral, and cognitive phenomenon. So understanding of pain requires the consideration of a lot of different areas: discriminative, motivational, affective, otherwise known as emotional, and cognitive evaluative components. So the discriminative aspect refers to the ability to localize the site, timing, and intensity of tissue damage or potential tissue damage. So that is our our primary sensory cortex, which is localizing the sensory information, like where's that coming from? The motivational affective aspect refers to the effects of the pain experience on emotions and behavior, including increased arousal and avoidance behavior. So this is kind of happening at a very low level of our brain. The cognitive evaluative aspect refers to the meaning the person ascribes to the pain. So you'll always talk to people who say, oh, I have a really high pain threshold. And really what they mean by that is that they ascribe a very low value to pain. Something like that. So how is pain controlled? We talked a little bit about this in pathophysiology and in modalities class with regard to gait theory and some of the other theories. I'm going to present you with a 5-level theory that we're going to talk about. But basically, the pain matrix determines whether ascending nociceptive processing will be normal, suppressed, sensitized, or reorganized. So antinociception is the top-down inhibition of pain signals, and pronociception is the biological amplification of pain signals. So we talked about gate theory in modalities class, and that was sort of the first scientific explanation in how pressure and other external stimuli or modalities inhibit pain transmission. So that was the gate theory. So some of the details were a little bit incorrect in the original theory, but that original theory is important because it inspired the inquiry into the mechanics and control of pain using things such as TENS and other modalities. So the counter-irritant theory is sort of incorporates findings from the research that was stimulated by the gate theory. The counter-irritant theory explains the inhibition of nociceptive signals by stimulation of non-nociceptive receptors, and that occurs in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So that's where the A beta fibers synapse with the C fibers, and they inhibit sending that pain up to the central nervous system. That's our counter-irritant theory. So antinociception is a suppression of pain in response to stimulation that would normally be painful. So if you're walking on a bed of nails, you're going to suppress that pain. That would normally be painful, probably. Endorphins are endogenous substances that activate antinociceptive mechanisms. Opiate receptors are the receptor sites that bind both endorphins and opiates. So we have these receptor sites built into our nervous system, and so we have endogenous chemicals that function on those receptor sites, and exogenous, the opiates that bind to those receptor sites. So the 5-level theory of the different sites of antinociception is presented right here. So there's a diagram in the book as well, and it shows the different nervous system structures. So level 1 occurs in the periphery, and aspirin and other non-narcotic analgesics like ibuprofen and that sort of thing, they suppress pain in the periphery. So remember how we talked about cells releasing chemical messengers to help affect things when we have inflammation? So histamines and prostaglandins, aspirin and other NSAIDs actually decrease the synthesis of prostaglandins, which results in prevention of nociceptor sensitization, and it reduces peripheral pain. So that all happens in the periphery. So you can think of that as sort of being a bottom-up antinociception. Level 2 is our counter-irritant theory. It occurs in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So the level 1, it all occurs in the periphery. It does not have an effect at the dorsal horn. Level 2 occurs in the dorsal horn via those local inhibitory neurons releasing, they have their counter-irritant effects. So the inhibition of nociceptive signals is done by stimulation of non-painful receptors. So that's our A beta fibers, synapse actually with an interneuron, which then inhibits the C fibers. So this is our TENS, our conventional TENS, our high rate TENS, our IFC. That's our dorsal horn. So both signals travel to the dorsal horn. The A beta neuron stimulates that interneuron, with the neurotransmitter binds to receptor sites in the pain system and inhibits the transmission of the pain signals. So closes the gate is what we've said before. So by stimulating those A beta fibers, that's how we are inhibiting the transmission. So it has to do with closing down the transmission. The level 1 has to do with desensitizing the nerve fibers, so there's no signal to transmit. Level 2 happens at the dorsal horn. It closes down transmission. Level 3 is a fast-acting neuronal descending system from the brainstem. So remember when we talked about autonomic nervous system having receptors, mechanoreceptors, and other receptors in the medulla and the brainstem? Well, those receptors in the medulla project axons to the spinal cord, and they release serotonin to interfere with pain messages. So level 3 happens in the background by the autonomic nervous system. So there is something that stimulates the autonomic nervous system to say, wait a minute, we got to damp down the pain. So this is a descending system. Level 4 antinociception is the hormonal system. So it involves areas in the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, which release beta endorphins. This is the area that it's thought that low-frequency TENS and acupuncture may act on. It's not proven, although we talked about some of those studies where it showed diminishing effects when people were on opioids and the effects on the mu-opioid receptors. So it's pretty likely that the theory is correct on this one. And the descending hormonal system is where the low-rate TENS and acupuncture have their pain control effects. Level 5 is the amygdala and cortical level. So expectation, excitement, distraction, and placebo all play a role in adjusting the transmission of nociceptive signals. So basically, your higher order cognitive and brainstem areas say, hey, wait a minute, we've got to pay attention to something else, so we can't pay attention to that pain, and so it damps the pain down. So different levels, different things happening. The first 2 levels are ascending, the last 3 levels are descending pain control. So we talked about antinociception. Pronociception is the biological amplification of nociception. So pain transmission, it can be decreased, but it can also be intensified at several levels. Edema and endogenous chemicals can sensitize free nerve endings in the periphery. So that's analogous to the level 1 antinociception. It's the opposite effect. So instead of decreasing those endogenous chemicals, they're increased and those nerve endings are sensitized. Pronociception may also occur when a person is anxious or depressed, and that's analogous to level 5 in the antinociception. So your higher level cortical systems are increasing the pain when you're anxious or depressed. So nociceptive chronic pain is chronic pain that is due to continuing stimulation of nociceptive receptors. The neurons are functioning normally. There are chemical changes in the damaged tissue that awaken sleeping peripheral nociceptors. The example of this would be chronic pain that results from a tumor pressing on nociceptors in the meninges surrounding the spinal cord, a vertebral tumor. So the only way that that pain is going to go away is if you remove or decrease the size of the tumor. But the important thing to remember about this is the neurons are functioning normally. They're getting stimulated and they're sending the signal. So in neuropathic chronic pain, which we'll talk about in the next chapter, the neurons are not functioning normally. So primary hyperalgesia refers to excessive sensitivity in the injured tissue. So excessive sensitivity to stimuli. So the example that is given in the book is a pain resulting from a mild heat on a burned fingertip. Picking up something warm is more painful than if the skin were not injured. And probably another example of this that a lot of us have experienced is you get a sunburn and then you get in just like a mildly warm shower and it feels searingly hot because your skin is already sensitized. So nociceptive chronic pain actually serves a useful biological function as a warning to protect injured tissue. It tells you like, oh, maybe you better take a cool shower until your skin heals from that sunburn.